We often talk about memory, pulling us back, nostalgia, or that sharp sting of regret. But in preparing for this, I was really struck by this idea that the strongest pull isn't what we remember, it's what we never finished.
That is a fundamental shift in perspective, isn't it?
Hmm.
Think about walking away from a conversation that just felt unresolved,
Hmm.
or a period of your life that ended so suddenly.
Yeah.
It's not just sadness, it's this physical clinging, like trying to pull wet seaweed off your foot. These fragments, they're not whispering about what was, but about what was left undone.
And that just reframes everything, because it means the usual idea of memory, the mind is this big, dusty library where everything's filed away by date. It just doesn't explain this active, present tension.
It's completely insufficient. Exactly.
Yeah.
If you look at this through a Gestalt lens, memory isn't a storage unit at all. It's not some place you visit to check out old books. It's a dynamic field that you inhabit right now. And that field is constantly, and I mean constantly, demanding integrity. When that's violated, you feel it immediately.
So for this deep dive, our mission is really to look at why these unresolved moments create such a profound structural tension in our awareness right now. This isn't fuzzy psychology. It feels more like a violation of a perceptual law.
That's the perfect term for it.
Yeah.
We're examining what's called the incomplete Gestalt. These are the open loops, the lingerers, and they operate in real time, subtly, or sometimes, quite violently, pulling our attention, our energy away from what's actually happening. They're always active, and often disguised as something else entirely,
Like anxiety.
like persistent anxiety, or just a low-grade irritation that you can't shake.
Okay, let's ground this. Think about those moments when something surfaces, and it's not a memory, it's a full-body emotional surge. You're in a perfectly safe situation, say a colleague raises their voice in a meeting, and bam! Instantly, you feel that same shame and powerlessness you felt as a kid. You react completely out of scale. Why? Why does that past moment hit with such force?
The crucial thing to understand here is that perception isn't passive. Your mind isn't just a camera recording what happens. It's an active process of organization. Your mind is fundamentally built to seek closure, to complete patterns, to make sense of the world. And that drive for wholeness is, well, it's non-negotiable.
So when a pattern is broken, the mind protests with this tension.
It throws a tantrum,
Yeah.
structurally speaking.
Yeah.
And there's a perfect way to feel this. Imagine a melody, a simple tune that stops just one note before the end, before the resolution.
Ugh, yeah, I can feel that now.
The tension is palpable, right? Your ear actually aches. You get this mental impulse to just hum that last note to release the pressure. That ache in your ear, that is structural tension. It's proof that your entire system demands wholeness, not just your intellect, your body.
That ache is the perfect metaphor because it's not passive, it's an active pressure, it's not nostalgia, it's a demand.
Exactly. And when that wholeness is denied, when that final note is never played, the unfinished experience doesn't just go into cold storage, it lingers. It's suspended in your perceptual field like a ghost limb, and it is constantly pulling your attention away from what is actually happening right in front of you. And if we go a bit deeper, that's where we find the incomplete Gestalt. These are what we often call our shadows. Not because they're evil or bad, but because they live in the dark corners of our awareness. But they're fully active. They're the unspoken words that somehow echo louder than anything ever said. The apologies never offered, the grief that wasn't allowed to be fully felt. They are sequences that started but never reached their natural end.
And these things show up every day. Maybe it was a truth you swallowed because you were afraid, or a conversation with someone you love that just ended. The circuit was left open. We think we've compartmentalized it, that it's in the past, but it's actually operating in the present, and it's fundamentally distorting how we see things now.
This is what we could call perceptual hijacking. Because the incomplete Gestalt has no closure, it can't recede into the background where memory belongs. So instead, it fiercely competes with current reality for your attention, for your energy. That means the energy you should be using to, say, focus on a work project or connect with your partner. A chunk of that is structurally siphoned off to manage that old feeling of shame or abandonment you never fully processed.
And then you get the paradox. Our first instinct when these feelings surge is always to suppress them, push it down, forget it, numb it.
And that suppression is a critical reinforcing mechanism.
Huh.
It's the worst thing you can do. The more you try to forget these unfinished moments, the more power they gain. See, suppression is an erasure, it's reinforcement. Every time you consciously push that feeling down, you're sending a signal to your deeper self.
A danger signal.
A huge danger signal. This is too dangerous to face. This must be hidden. And the mind, which is just trying to protect you, interprets that as, this is too important to ignore. We have to keep it active in the foreground.
So it stays in the foreground, but it's wearing a disguise. It's that general background anxiety or chronic procrastination or that little bit of irritability you can't quite place, the constant, subtle hum of unfinished business.
To really get our heads around this, we need to understand the architecture of attention itself. We use the term field, the idea that reality isn't just what happens out there. Reality is what emerges in the dynamic space between you and the world. And that field is being shaped moment by your attention, your history, your needs.
Okay, so if the field is the container, how does our mind organize all that information? Is this where figure and ground comes in?
Precisely. It's the basic mechanism of consciousness. Certain things rise into sharp, focused awareness. Those are the figures. Everything else just recedes into the background. That's the ground. So if you're reading a book, the words are the figure, the chair you're sitting on, the light in the room. That's all ground.
And the field remembers the incompleteness. The open loops create the tension.
Yes. Those unfinished figures, the stifled anger, the unresolved argument, they remain as open loops demanding completion. If a figure is interrupted by fear, by shame, by circumstance, it can't integrate into the ground. It just stays there, suspended, waiting. And because the field is holistic, one unresolved element taints the entire landscape. It's like having one out-of-tune string on a piano. Every beautiful chord you try to play after that just carries that dissonance.
So we're not just talking about being metaphorically stuck. This is a structural phenomenon. The anxiety you feel is structurally sound because the very framework of your reality is distorted.
Which brings us to a slightly complex but essential idea: isomorphism. It just means that your internal emotional tension mirrors the exact structure of an external incompleteness.
Can you give us a concrete example of that mirroring?
Sure. Let's say 5 years ago you were betrayed by a business partner, badly. And you just cut off all contact. You never expressed the rage, the vulnerability. That open loop, that incomplete gestalt, it has a specific shape. Trust violated, rage withheld, fear of vulnerability. Now today, a new colleague simply delays sending you a report, a minor thing. Your isomorphic response might be instant cold defensiveness, excessive control. The shape of your current anxiety matches the shape of the original unresolved betrayal, even though the trigger is tiny.
Wow, that makes so much sense. You're not just projecting the emotion, you're projecting the structure of the problem. And that's what creates what's called perceptual readiness. You're basically scanning the world for matching shapes.
You got it. You stop seeing reality as it is. You start seeing reality as your unfinished business expects it to be. The field is literally hunting for validation of its open loop. A neutral glance from your boss becomes suspicion. A delayed text becomes rejection. The past's hunger is projected onto the present.
I can really relate to that. I noticed for a while I had this constant need to over-explain myself at work, even for simple things. When I finally sat with it, I realized it was an echo of this very abrupt, unresolved criticism I got years ago from a mentor. I wasn't allowed to explain. And that need for validation just became structural. It bled into everything.
That's a perfect example. And that vulnerability really highlights how these structures live in our bodies, in our actions. So now for the critical pivot. If the goal isn't to forget, and it's not to analyze the past from a safe distance, what is the active path to liberation? How do we release the structure?
Right, if the tension is a demand for that final note, how do we play it?
We shift from analysis to presence. See, completion doesn't require changing history. It doesn't even require talking to the other person. It requires owning the figure in the now. Gestalt doesn't ask us to analyze the past. It asks, what is this tension, this tightness, this shame? What is it asking for right now?
So the goal is just to give that figure what it always missed, your full, undivided attention, without trying to fix it.
The act of witnessing. That's it. Imagine sitting with that younger self who felt the shame or who froze. The normal urge is to fix them, to give them advice. But completion is much simpler. It's just meeting them fully. It's saying, I see you, I feel what you felt. I am here now, and you don't have to carry this alone anymore. The loop closes. Not through action in the past, but through acceptance in the present.
And this leads to that core idea of surrender or radical allowance. We usually resist by saying, this shouldn't have happened, which is basically denying reality.
Resistance is a denial of reality, plain and simple. When you judge or suppress or try to explain away the memory, you are denying a legitimate part of your own lived experience. So the practice of allowance is to stop casting the shadow by turning toward it. Without judgment, you literally allow the shame or the rage or the helplessness to fill the room of your awareness. You just sit with this raw energy.
Just sit with it, without telling yourself it's wrong or it needs to be fixed immediately.
Exactly. And the incredible result of that allowance is liberation. The Gestalt of freedom isn't the absence of pain, that's an illusion. It's the absence of resistance to what is. When that resistance stops, the field reorganizes itself, the memories included, it's integrated, and it transforms from this demanding figure into just a part of the background. It stops being a debt you owe. Now, we've spent a lot of time on the personal shadows we carry, but let's consider one final, really profound idea. What if the shadows we carry, the inherited fear around money, the cultural silence around grief, what if they aren't just personal? What if they're part of a larger collective gestalt?
You mean these inherited structures? The emotional rules we get from our families or society. Things like, in our family we don't talk about that, or those deep cultural messages that vulnerability is weakness, or that men don't cry.
Yes. Those structures act as powerful, often invisible, limits on our perception. They dictate which figures are allowed to surface and which must remain incomplete. So, for instance, if society teaches you that success requires constant, exhausting effort, your mind develops an incomplete gestalt around rest. Rest is only allowed when you collapse, not as a natural part of the cycle. That figure remains perpetually hungry, unresolved.
And this is where the individual work actually becomes revolutionary. If the collective field is held together by millions of these unspoken, incomplete agreements, then when you meet and complete your own personal gestalt, you're loosening a thread in that whole fabric.
You shift the field. When you finally allow yourself to grieve a loss that your family silenced, or when you finally stand up for a truth your culture taught you to swallow, you create a ripple. You are completing a figure not just for you, you're showing the possibility of completion to the entire system.
That's a powerful thought for you, the listener. The work isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. You keep coming back to the same deep places, not because you failed the first time, but because you're ready to meet that structure at a deeper level. Each answer just reveals a new incompleteness.
And that's what reframes our wounds. They aren't flaws in our design. They are the very places where the light learned how to bend. They provide the depth, the contrast, the context for our capacity for real compassion and creativity.
So to summarize the core takeaway for you, you don't need to change the past. You need to complete its structure through presence, through allowance. And the physical result of this is so tangible. The air feels lighter, your breath is deeper, and your attention, most critically, is freed up to engage with the reality of the now.
And the goal ultimately is not to reach some mythical state of perfect peace where no shadow remains. I mean, that state...
So you've released the memory from its compulsive hold, you've integrated it into the ground. But the mystery of who you are, this ever-emerging being, that remains.
And perhaps that mystery, that wide-open space of constant emergence, is exactly where you were always meant to live.